A young girl went to meet her dad, but just vanished. Her parents called the police, and they started looking into it. They found really weird clues, like something out of a detective show. The case was crazy, but the police were good at their jobs and they figured out what happened. It was a huge shock. Jessica was born on June 22, 1986, in Allamont Springs, Florida. She had an older brother, a younger sister, and loving parents. Her dad worked as a construction worker and often traveled to other states for days at a time, leaving Jessica and her siblings with their mom. Jessica was a cheerful and sweet child who loved spending time outdoors with friends, playing with her siblings, and had a special fondness for animals. On April 5, 1996, when Jessica was 9, her family planned to visit her grandparents for Easter. That day, her dad went to the store to pick up some holiday supplies, while her mom stayed at their apartment to pack for the trip. After school, Jessica came home with some friends and asked her mom if she could go play in the yard. She wanted to wait there for her dad to return from the store. Her mom agreed, but told her not to wander off. Their apartment complex was set back from the main road and surrounded by trees, so her mom felt it was a safe place for Jessica to play. The neighborhood kids, including Jessica, often played outside without constant adult supervision, and nothing ever went wrong. A few hours later, around 6 p.m., Jessica's dad came home and asked his wife where Jessica was. She was surprised because Jessica was supposed to be in the yard waiting for her dad. They searched the yard but couldn't find her. They then checked with the neighbors, hoping someone had seen her. One neighbor remembered seeing Jessica earlier, sitting on a bench and reading a book, but that didn't help them find her. As it got darker and Jessica still didn't come home, they decided to call the police. Officers arrived quickly, started a search, and began talking to the neighbors. Despite their efforts, they couldn't find Jessica, so they decided to look in nearby streets. A few hours later, the police received an unexpected call. The caller's voice was hard to make out because of a lot of background noise, but the operator heard that Jessica would be found near a water pumping station a few miles from her home. The police hurried to the location and found a very sad scene. Jessica's lifeless body was discovered near the station, hidden in a black trash bag. It was only a few yards from the road, but since the pumping station was under a bridge, it was hard to see from the road. Next to her body were some magazines and a child's mirror. The police quickly identified her as Jessica and handed her body over to the medical examiners. Meanwhile, investigators focused on tracing the 911 call. They knew the call came from the murderer and hoped it would help them find out who did it. However, the call was made from a payphone at a gas station less than a mile from the crime scene. By the time officers got there, the person who made the call had already left. Detectives tried to find fingerprints on the phone, but it was difficult because it was a public payphone with many fingerprints on it. The investigators also thought the criminal might have wiped the phone clean or used gloves. Experts determined that Jessica was killed somewhere else and then brought to the water pumping station. Marks on the ground showed that the killer likely pulled her body from a vehicle in a trash bag and dragged it a short distance. Jessica's clothing was mostly intact, except for one missing shoe, which the police couldn't find. The only clue left at the crime scene was a tire track. The police weren't sure if it was from the killer's vehicle, but they took photos and made a cast of it. Medical experts found that Jessica had died from strangulation. The marks on her face and neck suggested the killer used their bare hands. They also found a hamburger in her stomach, which had been eaten less than an hour before her death. Her mother said she hadn't given Jessica anything like that day, leading police to believe the food was provided by the killer. Experts found no signs of sexual assault, so the motive of the perpetrator was unclear. At first, the police began to consider Jessica's parents as suspects. Neither of Jessica's parents had a solid alibi for the time she disappeared. The mother said she was packing in the apartment, while the father was out shopping. Technically, both of them had the chance to commit the crime. Police were puzzled about how the killer could have taken Jessica from the yard without anyone noticing or her screaming. This led them to think that the perpetrator knew Jessica well and that she might have left with him willingly. Another clue was the tone of the killer's voice on the 911 call. Despite efforts to clean up the recording, experts noticed sadness and regret in the voice, as if the killer felt genuine remorse for the murder. The fact that the killer took the risk of calling 911 seemed to show that they either wanted to play games with the police or were trying to ease their guilt. Given the caller's sadness, investigators leaned towards the second option. Police then checked Jessica's father's car and found something interesting in the trunk. A roll of black trash bags, like the one used to hide Jessica's body. However, an expert quickly identified that the bags from the crime scene were from a different roll, so the father was ruled out as a suspect. Investigators then turned their attention to other leads. Forensic experts examined Jessica's clothing and body for clues and found a few important things. There was a lot of dog hair on her clothes, and since Jessica's family didn't have a dog, it likely belonged to the killer. They also found human hair on her body from an unknown white male, but it would take a few days to get a DNA profile. 2 types of foreign fibers were also found on Jessica's clothes. Experts identified one as likely coming from a car seat cover and the other from a carpet. This supported the theory that Jessica was killed elsewhere and then brought to the water pumping station by car. For the dog hair, experts used the FBI's database, which has microscopic photos of hair from different dog breeds. After comparing the hair samples, they determined it belonged to a Shar-Pei. It seemed the killer owned a Shar-Pei, and the hair ended up on Jessica's clothes either in the killer's car or at their home. Investigators speculated that the killer might have lured Jessica into his car, taken her to McDonald's for a hamburger, and then brought her to his home before killing her. The experts tried hard to improve the phone call recording, but it was a tough job. They decided to take a different approach and asked NASA for help. NASA, with its advanced tools for cleaning up audio recordings, agreed to assist. They provided a clearer version of the audio, but the experts still needed a voice sample from the suspect to compare with the call recording. Since the detectives thought the killer might have known Jessica, they decided to play the recording for her mother. The mother listened and thought the voice sounded familiar but couldn't place it. On a second listen, she realized the voice belonged to their neighbor from the same complex. She remembered that the man often walked his Shar-Pei in the yard, but she couldn't recall his name. The police quickly identified the neighbor as 35-year-old James Crow. During the initial hours of Jessica's disappearance, Crow had been questioned along with other neighbors. He had mentioned seeing Jessica in the yard while walking his dog and said they spoke briefly before he left. Detectives looked into Crow's background and found he had no criminal record. He lived with his wife, who was a nurse. Crow was a former truck driver, now unemployed, and spent his time walking his Shar-Pei named Pumpkin. The detectives realized that just having a similar voice and a dog of that breed wasn't enough to arrest him, so they got a search warrant for his car. Inside the car, they found 2 troubling clues. Under the front passenger seat was an empty Happy Meal bag. Since Jessica had a McDonald's hamburger in her stomach and Crow had no children, this was suspicious. They also noticed the car had brand new tires, which seemed odd because Crow had replaced them the day of Jessica's murder. Even though the old tires were still in good shape, Crow said he left the old tires at a car service, which was strange since the tires weren't very old. When police visited the service, they found only 1 tire left from Crow's car. They compared this tire with the tread pattern found near the crime scene, but the patterns didn't match. However, detectives weren't completely sure if the tire mark was from the killer's car or another vehicle, as maintenance staff regularly visited the area and might have left similar marks. The police also searched James's apartment and found a new clue: a box with several rolls of trash bags that matched the size and color of the bag found with the victim. While this wasn't strong evidence on its own, detectives needed to figure out if these bags were from the same roll as the one used in the crime. At first, this seemed impossible because the bags had no markings or unique features, and there were many manufacturers. Determined to solve this, the detectives contacted N.L. Roberts, who handled quality control at the company that made the bags. Roberts identified the factory where the bags were produced, based on a special code on the box, which pointed to a facility in Virginia. He explained that a small amount of iron or titanium is mixed into the plastic of these bags, and the ratio of these materials changes daily. By using high-intensity X-rays, experts could measure the amount of these elements in the bags. They found that the ratio of iron and titanium to plastic in the bags from the crime scene and James's apartment was exactly the same. This indicated that they were made on the same day and likely from the same batch. Further investigation revealed that during production, tiny bits of debris stick to the machines, creating unique patterns on the bags. These patterns change over a few hundred feet of fabric, so if the bags were made close together in time, They would share similar streaks. Experts compared the patterns on the bags from both locations and found they matched perfectly. Additionally, when bags are rolled into bundles, the rolling machine often leaves tiny folds and creases that create a unique pattern. The experts found that the pattern on the bags from James's apartment matched the one from the crime scene. Overall, the analysis showed that the bag used by the killer was not only from the same company, but was likely from a roll in James's apartment, as it came from a batch of about 17 boxes apart. Forensic analysts also compared fibers found on Jessica's clothing with those from the carpet and car seats in James's apartment. The fibers matched. Finally, a sound expert compared the 911 call recording with a voice sample from James and confirmed that they came from the same person. Despite the impressive work by the experts, detectives faced a major issue. All the evidence was circumstantial. Still, they were sure James was involved and decided to arrest him. James was taken into custody, and the prosecution announced they would seek the death penalty. Since James continued to deny his guilt, the case went to trial. During the trial, the prosecution explained their version of events. James, who spent a lot of time outside with his dog, was well known to the local kids, including Jessica. On the day in question, James saw Jessica sitting alone on a bench and started a conversation. He offered to take her to McDonald's for a hamburger, and Jessica, who knew him, agreed. After the restaurant, James supposedly took her back to his apartment complex and invited her into his place. With his wife at work, James might have offered Jessica the chance to play with his dog, Pumpkin. The presence of carpet fibers from his apartment on Jessica's clothes suggested she was there on the day she died. Investigators believe James might have tried to assault Jessica, but something went wrong. The forensic report showed that Jessica was strangled with James's bare hands, and he also pressed his palm against her face, possibly because she tried to scream. After she died, he put her body in a trash bag and transported it to his car. To avoid suspicion, he drove a few miles and left her body near a water station. He then made the 911 call from a nearby gas station and went back home. During preliminary hearings, James's lawyers challenged the evidence, arguing there was no solid proof of his guilt. Although the judge accepted the evidence, the defense was right in saying that cases involving the death penalty require very high standards of proof. Because of this, James had a good chance of avoiding the death penalty. Given the circumstances, a plea deal was offered. James agreed to plead guilty to second-degree murder and receive a 40-year prison sentence without parole, avoiding the death penalty. By summer 1998, 2 years after the murder, James accepted the deal. He was not required to provide details about the crime, but mentioned that he wanted to spare Jessica's family from going through a trial. The prosecution believed James showed genuine remorse, partly because of his 911 call, which remained puzzling. The only reasonable explanation was that James wanted to ease his guilt for such a terrible crime. Jessica's parents were unhappy with the deal, hoping for the death penalty and a full confession, but James remained silent. James did not live to complete his sentence. He died in November 2011 at the age of 49 due to health problems, taking the details of his actions and motives with him. Jessica's case was remarkable for the unique work done by experts and detectives, with the detailed examination of ordinary trash bags, impressing even the judge, who had never seen such evidence before in his career. Alright guys, share your thoughts on this story in the comment section, and don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Thank you for watching.